The tourist had always dreamed of visiting the famous royal palace. It was a place full of history, tradition, and strict rules. People came from all over the world to see the grand building and the famous royal guards who stood silently, almost like statues. The tourist, named Mark, was from a small town far away. He had saved money for years to take this trip. When he finally arrived in the city, his heart was full of excitement and curiosity. Mark woke up early on his first day in the city. The sun was shining bright, and the air felt fresh and new. He put on his camera and a small backpack. Today he planned to visit the royal palace. He had seen many pictures and videos of the palace before, but now he was going to see it with his own eyes. He was especially curious about the royal guards. These guards were famous because they never moved or smiled while on duty, people said. They had to be very strong and patient to do this job. When Mark reached the palace, he saw the high stone walls and big iron gates. Many tourists were already there, walking slowly and taking pictures. Mark could hear the soft voices of people speaking many different languages. Everyone looked amazed by the beauty of the place. Then, Mark saw the royal guards standing tall. In their special uniforms, their hats were big and furry, and their jackets were bright red. The guards looked very serious. They did not blink much, and they did not react to anything around them. Mark watched the guard closest to him. The guard's face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. Mark noticed how still the guard was. Not a single muscle moved, and the guard seemed like a statue, but Mark also saw a kind of pride in the way the guard held himself. The guard was doing an important job representing the country and its traditions. Mark felt a little nervous, but also excited. He wanted to take a good picture with the guard. So he lifted his camera and clicked a few photos from a distance. As Mark looked at the pictures, an idea came to his mind. He thought it would be funny to see if he could make the guard react. Maybe he could make the guard laugh or smile, even though he knew it was not allowed. Mark thought it would be a small joke, and everyone would laugh. He did not think it would cause any trouble. After all, he was just a tourist, and he wanted to have fun on his trip. Mark took a few steps closer to the guard. The guard did not move. Mark then made a funny face, sticking out his tongue and crossing his eyes. He did this quietly, so only people near him could see. Some nearby tourists noticed Mark's action and smiled a little, but no one said anything. Mark felt happy. He thought he was being clever and playful. Next, Mark tried to wave his hands in front of the guard's face, hoping to get some reaction, but the guard stayed perfectly still. Mark laughed softly and did it again, moving his hands faster. Guard's eyes moved just a little, watching Mark carefully. Mark did not stop. He took a small step to the left and then to the right, making silly noises. Some tourists began to whisper, watching what was happening. Mark felt like he was the center of attention. He was not used to being watched by so many people. At first he enjoyed it, but then he noticed some serious faces among the crowd. A few local people looked unhappy. They whispered to each other and pointed at Mark. A man in a uniform nearby was also watching him. Mark ignored these signs. He thought they were just being too serious. Mark's playful teasing started to become a little louder. He began to laugh out loud, making funny sounds to annoy the guard. People around began to feel the mood change. Some tourists looked worried. Mark was still not aware of the problem he was creating. He just wanted to have fun and make this moment memorable. Suddenly, Mark heard a calm but strong voice behind him. A security officer was standing there. The officer looked serious, but polite. He told Mark to stop and respect the royal guard. The officer explained that it was a rule to never disturb or mock the guards while they were on duty. Job was very important, and showing disrespect could be seen as an offense. Mark was surprised. He had not expected such a warning. Smiled and said, "I'm just joking. No harm done." The officer did not smile. He repeated his request firmly. Mark still thought the officer was overreacting. He nodded and said, Okay, I'll stop now." But as soon as the officer walked away, Mark started to tease the guard again. More people around. Mark started to take out their phones and record what was happening. Mark did not care. He felt a strange mix of excitement and rebellion. He wanted to push the limits and see how far he could go. The guard's eyes followed every move. The guard did not speak or move, but Mark could tell he was paying close attention. The crowd grew a little bigger. Some people whispered, "This is not right." Others said he should be careful, but no one stepped in or kept making faces and noises, enjoying the attention. He did not know that things were about to get serious very soon. The day was getting warmer. The sun was higher in the sky. The royal palace looked beautiful under the bright light. But the mood near the guard was tense. Security officers who had been watching started to talk quietly to each other. They were deciding what to do next. Mark was still unaware that his small joke had turned into a serious problem. Mark was still standing near the guard, laughing and moving his arms. He thought the guard might finally smile or show some sign of humor. But the guard's face was calm and serious as always. Mark looked around and saw the worried faces of the people nearby. He started to feel a little unsure. Maybe he had gone too far. Suddenly, one of the security officers came closer and told Mark to leave the area. The officer explained that he must respect the rules and stop disturbing the guards. Mark hesitated. He wanted to argue, but saw the firm look in the officer's eyes. Mark decided it was better to step back. He slowly moved away, feeling confused, but still not fully understanding the situation. Mark walked to a quiet spot near the palace walls. He sat down on a bench and thought about what had just happened. He realized that this place was different. The people here took their traditions very seriously. He thought about the royal guard, standing still and proud. Maybe Mark had been wrong to mock him. Maybe he had not shown enough respect. Mark opened his camera and looked at the pictures he had taken. They showed the royal guard as strong and serious. Mark felt a new respect for the guard. He wished he could go back and apologize, but he was not sure if it was too late. While Mark sat quietly, he noticed other tourists passing by, some smiling, some talking softly about what they had seen. The story of the tourists teasing the royal guard was already spreading. Mark wondered what would happen next. Would there be any trouble? Would the police get involved? These questions stayed in his mind as he prepared for the rest of his trip. Mark stood up and decided to explore other parts of the city. He wanted to enjoy his visit and learn more about the culture. He knew he had to be more careful now. This was a lesson he would never forget. Respect for the customs of other countries is very important, even if you do not fully understand them at first. As the sun began to set, Mark took one last look at the palace from a distance. The guards were still standing strong, watching over their home. Mark felt a mixture of admiration and regret. He hoped that his next visits would be better and more respectful. He smiled softly to himself and walked away, ready to continue his journey with new understanding. After leaving the royal guard area, Mark tried to forget the strange feeling he had. But inside, he was still curious about what might happen next. He walked around the palace grounds, taking in the beautiful gardens, fountains, and old buildings. The palace was full of history, and many people were visiting that day. Families, couples, and tourists from all over the world enjoyed the place. Taking photos and learning about the royal traditions, Mark noticed a small cafe near the palace, where people were sitting and drinking tea or coffee. He decided to rest there for a while. He bought a cup of tea and sat at a table outside. From there, he could see the palace gates and some of the guards standing quietly. Mark's mind kept going back to the guard he had teased. He thought about how serious the guard was and how important his job must be. Mark felt a little ashamed that he had not understood this before. While sitting, Mark watched the people passing by. Some tourists whispered about what had happened near the guard. Some were curious, and others were clearly disappointed in Mark's behavior. Mark felt the weight of their eyes on him, even though many did not know he was the tourist who had made the jokes. He realized that his actions had not only upset the guards, but also some of the visitors and locals. Mark's phone started to ring. It was a call from the hotel. The front desk told him that the embassy had contacted them. Mark's family had reached out because they were worried about the news spreading online. The embassy wanted to speak with Mark to make sure he was safe and understand the situation. Mark felt a bit nervous now. He knew that his joke was becoming more serious than he had thought. After the call, Mark decided to visit the embassy. He wanted to explain everything and get advice on how to handle the situation. At the embassy, the officials were kind but serious. They told Mark that mocking the royal guards was not only disrespectful, but also illegal in this country. Explained that the royal guards represented the country's history and pride. And disturbing them could lead to arrest or fines. Mark listened carefully and promised to be more respectful. The embassy staff helped him understand the laws better and advised him to apologize publicly if needed. They said that showing respect to local customs was very important when traveling abroad. Mark agreed and felt thankful for their help. He now saw his playful actions in a new light. What seemed like a small joke to him was a serious matter here. After leaving the embassy, Mark returned to the palace area. This time, he watched the guards quietly, without disturbing them. He noticed how many people respected the space around the guards. No one was making jokes or trying to get their attention. Mark saw a group of local children quietly walking past the guards, their faces full of wonder and respect. This made Mark think deeply about his own behavior. Mark walked slowly toward the guards but kept a safe distance. He watched one guard stand perfectly still for a long time. The sun was warm on Mark's face, and the quiet sounds of the palace made the moment peaceful. Mark thought about the hard work and discipline it took to be a royal guard. It was not just about standing still, but about showing respect to the country and its people. Mark wanted to take a picture, but this time, he was careful. He took a photo from far away, not to bother the guard. A local tourist saw him and smiled, nodding in approval. Mark felt happy that he was finally respecting the rules, understood that his actions affected others, and that respect was the key to enjoying this experience. Later, Mark joined a guided tour of the palace. The guide told stories about the history of the royal family and the role of the guards. Mark listened with great interest. He learned that the guards had special training to remain calm and focused, no matter what happened around them. The guide explained that they were symbols of strength and pride for the country. As the tour ended, Mark felt grateful for the new knowledge. He realized that traveling was not just about seeing places, but also about understanding and respecting different cultures. Mark decided to share his experience on social media, not as a joke, but as a lesson for other travelers. He wrote about how important it was to be mindful of local customs and to treat traditions with respect. The story of Mark's earlier behavior had now reached many people online. Some were critical, but many appreciated his honesty and willingness to learn. Mark received messages from other travelers who shared their own experiences and advice. This helped Mark feel connected and supported. In the evening, Mark sat in a quiet park near the palace. The city lights began to glow, and the sounds of people enjoying their day filled the air. Mark thought about how different this trip had become from a simple joke to a serious lesson. It was a journey of growth. He smiled softly, feeling thankful for the chance to learn and improve. Mark looked at the palace one last time before going back to his hotel. The guards were still standing strong, watching over their home. Mark felt a deep respect for them now. He knew he would never forget this experience. It had taught him that every place had its own rules and stories. To truly enjoy travel, one must listen, learn, and respect. Mark's thoughts turned to the days ahead. He planned to visit more places, meet new people, and continue his journey with a humble heart. This trip was no longer just about sightseeing. It was about understanding the world and becoming a better traveler in person. Mark felt a deep sense of respect growing inside him as the days passed after his visit to the royal palace. He understood that his actions had caused worry, and he wanted to make things right. He knew that being a traveler was not only about visiting famous places, but also about showing kindness and understanding toward the people and customs of those places. One morning, Mark decided to return to the palace area. He wanted to see the guards again, but this time with a different attitude. As he walked toward the palace gates, he noticed how calm the atmosphere was. Families with children, couples, and other tourists moved quietly, taking pictures from a respectful distance. No one was trying to get the guards' attention or disturb them. Mark stood behind a small group of visitors who were listening to a guide telling stories about the guards. The guide explained how the guards were chosen carefully. They had to be strong, patient, and proud of their role. The guards trained every day to stand still and remain alert. Their job was not easy. It was a symbol of honor and a way to protect important traditions. Mark listened closely and felt admiration for the guards and their dedication. While watching the guards, Mark saw a small boy try to get closer to a guard to wave at him. The guard did not move but looked at the boy with kind eyes. It's a nearby parent. Gently told the boy to stay back and respect the guard, and Mark smiled softly. He remembered how he himself had been less careful just days before. Mark wanted to do something to show that he had changed. He thought about writing a letter to the palace or to the local tourism office to explain his behavior and apologize. Mark knew that words of respect and honesty were important, and he wanted others to learn from his experience. He believed that sharing what he learned might help other travelers avoid the mistakes he made. As Mark walked away from the palace, stopped at a small bookstore. Inside, he found books about the country's history, culture, and traditions. He bought a few and started reading eagerly. The stories of the royal family, the old battles, and the customs of the people fascinated him. Mark realized that every place had its own story. Knowing these stories helped people connect more deeply. In the following days, Mark explored other parts of the city with an open heart. He visited markets, museums, and quiet parks. Everywhere he went, he paid attention to the way people behaved and what they valued. Mark learned to listen more and speak less. He smiled at strangers and greeted them politely. He noticed how people responded kindly when he showed respect. One afternoon, Mark met a local man named Ahmed. Ahmed was friendly and spoke good English. They started talking about the city and its traditions. Mark shared his story about the royal guard and how he had learned to be more respectful. Ahmed listened carefully and said, "It is good that you learned. Many visitors come and do not understand our ways. Respect is very important here." Ahmed invited Mark to a local tea house. They sat together, drinking sweet tea and talking about life. Ahmed told stories about his family and the city. Mark felt grateful for the kindness and patience Ahmed showed. He realized that travel was also about building friendships and understanding different ways of life. One day, Mark received a message from the local tourism office. They had read his letter of apology and appreciated his honesty. They invited him to a small event where local guides talked about the importance of respecting culture and traditions. Mark accepted gladly. At the event, many travelers shared their stories, and local people talked about what made their country special. Mark spoke at the event too. He told everyone about his mistake and what he had learned. He said that traveling with respect made experiences richer and helped build bridges between people. The audience listened quietly and clapped at the end. Mark felt proud that he could turn a difficult moment into something positive. As Mark's trip came to an end, he packed his bags. With new memories and lessons, he knew he would never forget the royal guards and the lesson they taught him. More than just a tourist, Mark felt like a traveler who had grown and changed. He understood the true meaning of respect and kindness in a world full of different cultures. Before leaving, Mark visited the palace one last time. He stood quietly near the gates and looked at the guards. This time, he did not take pictures or make jokes. He simply bowed his head in respect. The guards stood tall and proud, the same as before. Mark smiled softly and walked away, feeling peace in his heart. Mark's story would stay with him forever. It was a reminder that every place deserves respect and every culture has value. He hoped that others would learn from his experience and become better travelers. Mark knew that understanding and kindness could create a world where everyone felt welcomed and respected. Mark's peaceful moment near the palace gates was soon interrupted by a serious event he did not expect. As he was leaving the area, a group of security officers approached him quietly but firmly. They asked him to come with them for questioning. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He was confused and a little scared. He wondered what he could have done wrong after trying so hard to show respect. The officers explained that despite his recent efforts, some of his earlier actions had been recorded by security cameras and phone videos. These recordings were being reviewed by the police because mocking the royal guards was considered a serious offense in that country. The officers said they needed to ask Mark some questions to understand the situation better. Mark nodded, trying to stay calm. As they walked together toward a nearby police station, Mark thought about how quickly things had changed. Just days ago, he was joking with the guards, and now he was facing real consequences. He hoped that the officers would see that he meant no harm and that he had learned his lesson. Mark felt a mix of nervousness and hope. At the police station, Mark was taken to a quiet room. The officers asked him about his visit to the palace, why he had made jokes near the guards, and if he understood the country's rules. Mark answered honestly. He explained that he had been ignorant at first, but had since realized the importance of respect. He told them about his visit to the embassy and the apology letter he had sent. The officers listened carefully. One of them said that many tourists did not understand the strict rules around the royal guards. They reminded Mark that the guards were symbols of the country's pride and history, and disturbing them was taken very seriously. The officers appreciated Mark's honesty and cooperation, but said that the law had to be followed. Mark was asked to wait while the officers made a decision, sat quietly thinking about his trip and the events that had brought him here. He hoped that this would be the end of his troubles, and that he could return to enjoying the city peacefully. After some time, the officers returned with good news. They decided not to press charges, but warned Mark strongly not to repeat such behavior. The officers gave Mark a formal warning and explained that if he broke the rules again, the consequences could be much worse, including fines or even detention. Mark promised to respect all laws and traditions during the rest of his visit. The officers also told him that sharing his story and learning from the experience was important for other travelers. Relieved, but thoughtful, Mark left the police station with the security officers. He thanked them for their understanding and kindness, despite the seriousness of the situation. The officers wished him a safe trip and reminded him again to respect local customs. Back outside, Mark took a deep breath. He realized how close he had come to real trouble. This experience was a strong reminder that rules were there for a reason, and respect was not just a polite idea, but a serious law in some countries. Mark felt grateful that the officers had given him a second chance. Mark's story did not end there. Yes. The news of his arrest and warning quickly spread among tourists and locals. Some people were surprised that a small joke could lead to such serious actions, but many understood the importance of respecting traditions. The local media covered the story carefully, focusing on the lesson rather than the mistake. Mark's friends and family followed the news with concern. They sent messages of support and reminded him to stay careful. Mark was thankful for their kindness and shared his experiences honestly. He wanted everyone to know that traveling respectfully was the best way to avoid problems and enjoy new places. After this event, Mark's trip changed again, became more careful, more thoughtful. He took time to learn about the places he visited and the people he met. Mark asked questions, listened to advice, and tried to understand the culture deeply. He no longer saw himself as just a visitor, but as a guest who had to honor the rules and traditions of the places he traveled. Mark also started to write a travel blog. He wanted to share his journey, the mistakes, the lessons, and the moments of growth. He wrote in simple words so that other travelers could understand and learn from his experience. Mark hoped that his story would help others avoid trouble and make their trips more meaningful. In his blog, Mark described the royal palace, the guards, and the strict rules he had learned about. He told readers about the importance of respect, patience, and understanding when visiting foreign countries. Mark also encouraged travelers to do research before visiting new places and to always behave kindly and thoughtfully. As the days passed, Mark's blog gained readers from many countries. People wrote back to him, thanking him for sharing his story and advice. Some travelers shared their own stories of culture shock and learning. Mark felt happy knowing that his experience had helped others and had created a small community of respectful travelers. On his last day in the city, Mark visited the palace one final time. He walked slowly through the gardens and stopped near the guard posts. The guards stood as strong and silent as ever. Mark looked at them with deep respect and gratitude. He knew that these guards were more than just people standing still, were symbols of a country's pride and history. Mark bowed his head quietly and whispered a small thank you. He promised himself that he would always remember this trip not just for the places he saw, but for the lessons he learned about respect, culture, and kindness. As Mark walked away from the palace, the sun set behind the tall stone walls, casting long shadows. The city was peaceful, and Mark felt calm inside. He was ready to go home, but he knew that he carried something special with him, a better understanding of the world and a heart full of respect for others. Mark's journey was coming to an end, and as he prepared to leave the city, he took time to reflect deeply on everything he had experienced. The trip had been full of surprises, challenges, and valuable lessons. He thought about the royal palace, the guards, and the many people he had met. What stayed with him most was the idea of respect, how important it was to show it. It's not just to people, but to the history and culture of every place. Before leaving, Mark spent his last day visiting small shops and markets. He talked with local shopkeepers and asked about their lives and traditions. Everyone he spoke with appreciated that he was interested and respectful. Mark realized that respect opened doors and hearts. People smiled more when he listened carefully and acted kindly. Mark also met a group of fellow travelers at a small cafe. They shared their stories and advice about traveling in different countries. Mark told them about his experience with the royal guard and the lessons he learned. The other travelers listened closely, some nodding with understanding. They appreciated Mark's honesty and his message about respecting local customs. That evening, Mark wrote one last entry in his travel journal. He wrote about the mistakes he made and how he had grown from them. He wrote about the royal guards standing strong, not just as protectors of a palace, but as protectors of a culture's pride and dignity. Mark wanted to remember this feeling forever, the mix of humility, respect, and gratitude. As Mark packed his bags, he thought about how travel was more than just seeing new places. It was about learning, growing, and becoming a better person. He felt lucky to have had this journey, even though it had its difficulties. Mark understood now that every country had its own rules and traditions. It was a traveler's responsibility to honor them. Before leaving the city, Mark went one last time to the royal palace grounds. He stood quietly near the guards and watched how still and proud they were. He felt a deep sense of connection to the place and its people. Mark silently thanked the guards for their service and for teaching him a lesson he would never forget. As Mark left the palace and walked toward the airport, he felt ready to return home. But he knew he was not the same person who had arrived weeks ago. This trip had changed him. He was more patient, more understanding, and more respectful of different cultures and traditions. Mark planned to share his experience with friends and family when he returned. He wanted them to know how important it was to be careful and thoughtful when traveling. Mark hoped his story would help others avoid mistakes and enjoy their travels more fully. The flight home was quiet. Mark looked out the window at the clouds below and thought about the journey ahead, not just the flight, but the journey of life. He felt thankful for the chance to learn and grow. He knew that respect and kindness were the best companions on any trip anywhere in the world. Mark smiled softly, ready to begin a new chapter, carrying the lessons of his travels close to his heart.